From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later on tonight, hypnotism and the mystery of the universe. Here's what's happening. What a mess at the airports. On the heels of Southwest Airlines mess and disaster, U.S. and some Canadian flights were slowly resuming now departures, and a ground stop was lifted after the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, scrambled to fix a system outage overnight that forced a halt to all U.S. departing flights. More than 7,300 flights were delayed, 1,100 canceled, according to the FlightAware website, and the first national grounding of flights in about 2 decades. And the White House announced that President Biden has been briefed on the massive FAA outage, though asserting that there's no evidence it was caused by any cyber attack. It was a complete breakdown. Let's check in with registered investment advisor, Ms. Shedlock. Miss, I wanted you to check in on this story because of your abilities to dig deep. What the heck happened?
This is really peculiar, George. Not only the U.S., but Canada, about an hour later than the U.S., and they say it's not related. I'm having a hard time getting my grips around that one, George. Now, this was a breakdown. This is the first time we've had an outage like this since 911. It's the first time we've had nationwide grounding of flights since 911. This has to do with the NOTAM, Notices to Air Missions system that's been in place. It's a little bit outdated, probably needs some work. But they should have had a backup. They say it's a corrupted database, but they don't know how it got corrupted. How did the Canadian system get corrupted an hour later? Very, very bizarre, George.
It is. Sounds like a hack to me, Mish, doesn't it?
It does. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said they don't think it's a cyber attack, but they're investigating. They don't want to rule it out. I don't know. U.S. and Canada at the same time, George, very, very bizarre. Tomorrow we have the CPI report. All eyes are on that. Inflation has been coming down, but I don't think coming down fast enough for the Fed. So I'm anticipating another rate hike in February. I think the economy is slowing here real fast, and we got to keep our eyes on that report tomorrow.
All right, thank you, my friend. Ms. Shedlock. Yeah, what a disaster at the airports, folks. President Joe Biden does not support a ban on gas stoves, according to the White House, after a consumer safety official said such a measure was on the table. The response from the White House came after Biden appointed U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commissioner Richard Trumka Jr. called gas stoves a hidden hazard in a recent interview. Jeff Beck, the legendary guitarist who played with the Yardbirds and fronted his own Jeff Beck Group, has died at the age of 78 of bacterial meningitis, according to a statement from his publicist. The artist was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice as a member of the Yardbirds in 1992 and later as a solo artist in 2009. He was one heck of a guitarist. A little bit of kindness shown toward others can help beat the feeling of depression and anxiety, according to a new study from Ohio State University. Scientists report that performing good deeds leads to notable mental health improvements not seen in 2 other therapeutic techniques commonly used to treat the conditions. The human brain is an amazing piece of biological machinery, responsible for everything from dreaming up Shakespeare sonnets to the muscle coordination of scoring a World Cup winning goal. Yet even if our brains remain spry into our old age, our bodies often don't. But what if we replace them? I'm not kidding. That's the idea of a controversial neurosurgeon, Sergio Canavera, who claims in a recent article that it would be technically feasible to put another brain in another body. Howard Bloom, the author of The Global Brain himself, is with us. Howard, what they didn't explain was if they take the brain out of a young, older body to put it into a young body, what happened to the young person?
Well, here's the whole story. On December 22nd of 2022, a little over 2 weeks ago, Dr. Sergio Canavero, a neurosurgeon in Turin, Italy, published a shocking medical paper in the journal Surgical Neurology International. The paper laid out a horror movie proposition, transferring the brain of an aging human to a younger, more athletic body, thus lengthening the life of the person purchasing the brain transfer. The body donor would be someone declared brain dead, a person in a coma, or rendered brain dead by a car crash. Or, much farther down the line, at age 60, you would start making clones of yourself so that a young you can be your own body donor. In the journal article, Dr. Canavero gave a detailed surgical instruction on how the brain transplant could be achieved, complete with techniques like anastomosis, drugs like fusogens, and devices like a robotic scoop with retractable tines. This wasn't the first time that Dr. Canavero has made headlines. In 2015, he proposed cutting the head off of one patient and transplanting it onto the neck of a body donor. The proposal was so controversial that it got him fired. Canavero was director of Turin's Advanced Neuromodulation Group. His colleagues terminated his contract. But the Chinese were on the prowl for pioneering Western thinkers who had been cut adrift, so China's Harbin Medical University made Canavero an honorary professor. Meanwhile, Canavero had courage. He persisted. He said that he already had the body donor and the transplant candidate lined up for the head transplant, and that the surgery would take place by 2017. The candidate for head transplantation was Valery Spiridonov, a Russian computer programmer suffering from spinal muscular atrophy. In other words, his body was wasting away. 2017 came and went, and there was no head transplant. In 2019, Spiridonov pulled out. But Canavero could not be stopped. He performed a rehearsal head transplant on 2 dead bodies, and he claimed that experiments in China with head transplants had succeeded. It's just that he's not free to talk about them. There are a few caution flags on this story. The journal in which the report was published includes, among roughly 30 editors, Dr. Sergio Canavero. So peer review would have been done by colleagues who already knew his work and who had shown their confidence by assigning him the title of Associate Editor-in-Chief for Head and Spinal Cord Transplantation. And Canavero is unusual. Says Canada's National Post, he relishes being described as crazy as a bat. He hasn't watched television since 1993. He doesn't own a car. He's felt a deep affinity with Spider-Man's near Peter Parker. He meditates and refrains from drink. He also practices jiu-jitsu, but he has a wife and 2 kids. And Canavero's journal article is accompanied by a comment from one of the journal's 5 founders, Dr. James I. Ausman, a professor of neurosurgery at UCLA. Ausman writes that Dr. Canavero has had proven success in acute spinal cord repair using his own pioneering techniques in rats, cats, dogs, and monkeys. Ausman also points out that in the late 2000s, other surgeons had success with impossible things like kidney, liver, lung, hand, heart, and face transplants. So anything is possible. But at the end of the journal article, even Dr. Canavero himself confesses that his elaborate plan for brain transplantation is still theoretical. However, it is crucial to theorize. It is crucial to come up with science fiction ideas and to turn those ideas into realities, even if they get you fired.
The strange story, Howard. Let's keep track of that one. Howard Bloom, checking on the possibility of putting one brain into another body. Can you believe that? Well, is it possible that time, space, and reality itself all ultimately depend on us? The Observer. In a moment, Robert Lanza back with us. His latest work is called Observer. He's next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Robert Lanza back with us, renowned scientist, author of a number of books whose groundbreaking research spans many fields, from biology to theoretical physics. He's worked with some of the greatest minds of our time, including Jonas Salk, B.F. Skinner. A U.S. News and World Report cover story called him the living embodiment of the character played by Matt Damon in the Good Will Hunting movie, and described him as a genius, a renegade thinker, and likened him to Albert Einstein. His latest work is called Observer, which just came out. Robert, welcome back after 5 years.
Hello, George. Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Good to have you back with us. And this is your first novel. All your others were nonfiction books, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, I've written lots of peer-reviewed scientific papers and nonfiction books, in fact, over 30 of them. So I thought it would be great, to do something and write about my ideas in a fun, entertaining way, and through storytelling, bring to life the whole science behind the astounding fact that life, space, time, reality, all of that ultimately depends on us, the observer.
Super. And you wrote this with Nancy Kress, who's a great author in her own right.
Yeah. She's one of the greatest science fiction writers alive. Brilliant, clear-cut science fiction writer who's written about cutting-edge science in most of her work.
Now, why'd you decide to write a novel this time?
Well, like I said, I mean, I've published some peer-reviewed papers on these topics, with some theoretical physicists. My last book, The Grand Biocentric Design, was published with a theoretical physicist as well. And although they're trade books for a general audience, I thought, again, it would be really fun to do this in a fun way through storytelling. And actually, some of these experiments that are out there, particularly those in quantum physics and quantum mechanics, they involve a lot of cutting-edge science like quantum entanglement, the multiverse, paradoxes in time, and the nature of consciousness. So I thought to make this fun and to bring it to life, this would be the way to do it.
Well, and you did it in a big, big way, and you have a special character in the book. Tell us about her.
Yeah, Carol. She's the book's main character. She's a young neurosurgeon, and in an effort to help her impoverished sister who has a disabled child that needs support, she accepts this mysterious proposal from her great uncle, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist Sam Watkins. And at a medical facility in the Caribbean, they join this eminent physicist and this charismatic tech guy, and to develop this technology that could actually solve the riddle of the mortality of the soul. And so she helps her great-grandfather is this guy, Sam, again, who was dying of cancer. And so they're hoping to give him life of a truer kind. So they're on the verge of this humanity-altering discovery, and it throws Carol into a kind of danger and love that she could have never imagined. All the elements that you expect in a novel.
And this is a movie. It's headed for a movie, isn't it? I can tell.
Knock on wood, I hope.
Now, you have talked a lot about biocentrism. Explain what that is, Robert.
So a new scientific theory, if you consider that in the last decade or so, where the observer is actually the basis of reality. It's basically a examination of everything we think we know about time, space, consciousness, and the nature of the universe.
And how do people apply it in their day-to-day life?
So, again, most of this has to do with everything we think is going on in our life, from life to death. And, right now, we think, according to the classical way of thinking, we think everything is observer independent, so that we think we just die and rot into the ground and that sort of thing. And, of course, that story is false. And so this helps there. But also there's all sorts of exciting technological advances that could happen through this. We could get into that more later if you want, but, the possibility of time travel, which, traditionally is considered near impossible, becomes far more probable and indeed likely. Machines and robots that can think and have consciousness like us. Again, that can't happen without these biocentric principles, which, I could go into a little more. And then on a more fundamental level, I think, this could ultimately change the entire evolution of life, take it to a different plane of existence. I mean, if biocentrism is right, in Immanuel Kant, for instance, what he had in his critique of pure reason, basically the mind's algorithms define our universe. And that's what the observer, this book is all about. It might be possible to modify time, instead of it being linear, to be 3D like space. So you could basically walk through time like you walk through space. And after creeping along for 4 billion years, life would finally escape from its corporeal cage. So there's a lot of cool things, there are a lot of cool implications here.
Robert, what do you think the universe really is? What is it?
So, this is something that everyone thought they had all figured out. It's just this pre-existing entity that just is out there. You open your eyes and there it is. And then along 100 years ago comes quantum mechanics, and they started finding out, wait a minute, that isn't exactly what these experiments are finding. And so there are all kinds of experiments now. Just to give you a quick one, is this something called the famous two-slit experiment. And so when a particle passes through two slits in a barrier, the particle behaves like a bullet and goes through one slit or the other if you're watching it. But if you don't watch it, it can go through both holes at the same time. So how can a particle out there change its behavior depending on whether you watch it or not? And, of course, the answer is simple. Reality is a process that involves our consciousness.
Hence the title Observer, right?
Exactly.
How about time? What is time? Albert Einstein would love that question.
As a matter of fact, speaking of Albert Einstein, I not long ago published a paper in the same journal. He published his theories of relativity in his famous E equals MC squared thing, and it was actually on time. It was on the arrow of time. And, what we are showing that, Einstein showed that time was relative to the observer. But his paper, this paper that I wrote, which was actually, by the way, the cover story for the journal, takes it a step further, and it argues that the observer actually creates it. And, it's very technical, so we won't go into that, but it basically shows that the intrinsic properties of quantum gravity, which tries to connect quantum mechanics with Einstein's theory of relativity in matter, that they can't explain the effectiveness of the emergence of time and the lack of quantum entanglement that we see in our everyday life. And what we show and argue is that it's necessary to include the properties of the observer, and in particular, the way we process and remember information. And if you think about it, that's pretty obvious. If you listen to your doorbell or your cell phone ring, you cannot hear that ring without first comparing the silence before the noise. So you have to have a memory that connects those in order for that to happen. And the same thing occurs for space. I mean, you can't read something without comparing here the white with the print that's, say, black. So I could go on and on, but that's it in a nutshell.
One of the premises of the book Observer is that death really doesn't exist. Explain that.
So, right now our classical everyday way of thinking is based on the belief that the world has this objective, observer-independent existence. And we believe death because we associate ourselves with our body, and we know bodies die, end of story. Only that story is wrong. It's false. A long series of experiments suggest that death isn't the terminal event we think. Rather, it's just a break in our linear continuity in space and time. And Einstein, speaking of Einstein, was right. After the death of his old friend, he said, "Now Bessel has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me. That means nothing. People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between the past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." And, I like to think of it like one of those old phonographs. So you listen to the music, but that doesn't alter the record itself. And depending on where the needle is, you hear a certain song, that's the present. And the music before and after the song is the past and the future. So in like manner, every moment endures in nature always. The record doesn't go away. So all of them, like all the songs in the record, they exist simultaneously, even though we can only experience them piece by piece. So in the end, life has a nonlinear dimensionality. It's sort of like a perennial flower that returns to bloom in the multiverse. We can think of our individual bodies as destined to self-destruct. But again, if you think about the me feeling, the who am I, it's just a 20-watt fountain of energy operating in the brain. But one of the surest axioms of science is that energy never dies. It can neither be created nor destroyed.
Does God enter into Observer at all?
Well, God is a big word, and lots of people around the globe have different views on that.
That's
and,
true.
Einstein once said he believes in Spinoza's God. I believe that certainly there's a lot more going on than science gives credit to, and certainly in the end, I think a lot of what we associate with God about the soul being immortal is true. Whether there's a man sitting on a ball up there with a white robe, that's a different story. But I think the essence of what a lot of the great religions have been saying has a truth to it.
That's fascinating. And how much does consciousness play a part in all this, Robert?
Really everything. I mean, what we normally consider reality, what we see and observe, that is all happening in your mind. I mean, there's absolutely nothing you can know, think, or experience that is not happening in your mind. And so it's really synonymous with nature. And that is exactly what all these experiments, what actually relativity and quantum mechanics is now showing. They're not anomalies. The observer-dependent findings, they're real, and that's what we're grappling with now, is how to put everything together in a coherent way where it aligns with all the experimental data.
Robert, I got to ask you, you're related at all to the late actor-singer Mario Lanza?
No, I'm not. But actually, they did name my brother Mario Lanza.
Really? That's cool. We're going to take a short break here. We'll come back and talk more. Robert Lanza with us. His website is his name, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. His latest book is a novel. He's written a lot of nonfiction books, but the novel is called Observer. But we'll be back in a moment. We shall take your calls next hour with Robert Lanza as we talk about the latest work that he did, Observer, that he wrote with Nancy Kress. It is a novel, but it's got a lot of great science in it. And if you're into science, it's a great read for you. But we'll be back with him in a moment to talk more about that. But your calls next hour. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with Dr. Robert Lanza with us as we're talking about his book, Observer. Robert, the book has just come out. I assume it's available on Amazon. Has it hit the bookstores too?
Yeah, it should be in all bookstores. Definitely available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever your favorite store is.
Now, you're a medical doctor by trade, right?
Yes, I am. Yes, MD, University of Pennsylvania.
How did you start wavering into this area?
So, actually, my interest in the nature of reality long preceded my medical career. So, as a boy, my parents didn't really allow me to hang around the house very much except to eat or sleep. So I was on my own, and so for play, I would take long excursions, and I'd walk for miles deep into the forests of eastern Massachusetts, where I grew up. Actually, I grew up just a few miles away from where Emerson and Thoreau did, other transcendentalists. And as I was pondering the larger existential questions and the nature of life, I began to realize that there was something wrong with the static, objective reality that I was being taught in school. So, I spent the rest of my life developing those ideas, and, that's how I came up with, biocentrism and indeed this new book, Observer.
What has been the reaction to some of your work from colleagues or people in the similar fields?
So, anytime you have a new paradigm, it's always considered ridiculous when you judge it from within the existing paradigm. So again, on the positive side, you get a lot of people who are very enthusiastic about it, saying that it changed their life or it's the best book they ever read. In fact, the great Nobel laureate E. Donald Thomas once said, that there's any short statement doesn't do justice to this, and that importantly, it makes you think. But that being said, there are a lot of people, who have their ideas ingrained, and Immanuel Kant, for instance, who also thought of space and time as forms of sense perception, no less a figure than Hubert Spencer, finding that at the onset, thought he was a stupid man and threw his book away. And he said it was either, he thought, because of vexation at a threatened reform, or what he was really reluctant to have to admit, a real narrow-mindedness. And actually, the great Nobel physicist Max Planck once said, a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the day of light, but rather because the opponents eventually die and they're replaced by a new generation that grows up with it. So again, there are a lot of people out there, no amount of evidence, whether they're scientists or not, that are going to change their minds. So you really have to have an open mind and be receptive to new ideas. Absolutely.
Robert, a lot of thinkers are beginning to change their views on the thoughts of reality in terms of what it is all by itself. I'm almost in that camp, not quite there yet, but I'm getting close. How about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I've spent my life as a scientist trying to figure out how all this experiments, how it all goes together. And it's the only rational way, to really think about any of this. It's the only way that any of those experiments, whether it's relativity or quantum mechanics, make any sense. Most scientists or physicists, indeed, throw their hands up and say, gee, it's weird. We have no idea why the world is that way. And all they got to do is accept the experiments, and the rest of it falls perfectly into line.
See, I will not accept the fact that whatever has happened, let's say just on planet Earth, was random. I just think there's too much complexity. There's too much thinking of how this happened. There's just too much organization. Just using the human body by itself. Who would conceive? How could nature conceive by itself? Creating a being with 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose to smell, a mouth to eat, legs to walk, arms to do things. How would you come up with that?
You could. You're absolutely right. I mean, I'm a scientist. I'm a geneticist, actually, so I understand genetics. I understand how random mutations are selected for a giraffe to have a long neck. But what you're saying is 1,000% right. I mean, just statistically, I have a whole book in a whole chapter in my previous nonfiction books explaining that when you do the statistics and you do the randomness, it's virtually impossible by randomness to even get the first 5 lines of a novel done randomly. A million monkeys typing, that's one of the sayings. It's just simply absolutely impossible. The fact that there are so many things that have to be so perfectly aligned. As a matter of fact, it turns out that all the laws and constants of the universe, are over 200 of these parameters, are so fine-tuned that if you change them even 1%, stars, for instance, would not ignite. There'd be no sun. Or that gravity would be too high or low, so there'd be no planets, no universe.
That's right.
So all of these are statistically impossible to just randomly be the way they are. They're not that way. And the reason is simple, is that, again, it comes down to the observer. Why is everything designed so that the observer seems to be there? And the reason is because the observer creates those ideas, the rules and the laws, the way our mind works, is because of the observer. So without the observer, these observer findings, the exact, precise findings that we're finding that exactly allow for the observer, are not an accident at all. There's an exquisite underlying intelligence to everything that's happening.
And I call it God again, but is it conceivable that we are the creation of an observer?
Well, we are. We are indeed. I mean, you and I, again, there's nothing out there. We know from experiment after experiment that everything exists only in quantum superposition. It's basically just probabilities. Until your mind or the observer lays that out, it doesn't exist. Again, we know from all literally hundreds of experiments that not a single subatomic particle are out there that makes up anything has a definitive place or location. I mean, they exist only as a range of probabilities, and only when they're being observed can a particle be thought of as having any real existence, either duration or position in space. And that's exactly what threw all the scientists for a loop with quantum mechanics. Even Einstein couldn't understand it. You can't believe God plays dice. But indeed, those experiments have held up now 100 years, and they're real.
Robert, where does good and bad fit in? I mean, we've got good people, we've got bad people. I mean, why?
Yeah, no, I mean, that is exactly right. And actually, it does come into play here because, again, what happens is that when you think of justice, you think of heaven or hell as something that God is going to dole out, but there's actually natural justice built into the very fabric of reality. It turns out that actually that when you think of space and time, that's what really separates us. We're really all, I mean, I don't want to sound woo, but we're really all different manifestations of the same self. So that if you punch somebody, if I were to hit you right now, for instance, don't take that personally.
Thanks, Robert.
You wouldn't. The person you were an hour ago or a year ago wouldn't feel it, but it's still you. In the same way, space and time, we only think of them in a linear way. But again, all these experiments are showing that they're not connected that way. They're basically, that there's a whole different reality going on. So good and evil is going to be absolute justice. If you inflict negative harm or things, you will ultimately, the same self that you experience and will experience. So there's no getting around it. A good person who does good deeds is going to be personally rewarded for it, and a person who is evil or bad will be punished, even if it extends beyond our normal linear way of thinking.
During my news segment tonight, I had a story about how people who do good feel better than people who don't, and I think that's absolutely true.
It is. I mean, if you have empathy and you do a good deed, I mean, the hope is that you are identifying with that good deed.
It's truly remarkable. And where does this go in 20 years or 40 years? What's the next stage for something like this?
So, I think, right now, we hear a lot about, for instance, machines and robots that can think and have consciousness. This is, in fact,
it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah. Yeah, but the thing is, as I've already mentioned, that these observer-determined findings of relativity in quantum mechanics, again, are not a fluke. They go to the very core of the consciousness-reality relationship. So for when you think about an object or a machine, there's no other principle but physics in the chemistry of the atoms that compose it. So what you really we know is that only in consciousness of the observer do they exist really in space and time. And so they can't have that unitary sense experience, what we call our perceptions or consciousness. So for this to occur, it has to happen in the mind before the spatial-temporal relationships that are involved in our sense experience is happening. And once we understand biocentric principles, then we can do that. Then we would be able to reconstruct that so that a machine or a robot could indeed have consciousness. And then on a more far-fetched but really exciting possibility, may not be 20 years, it might be 100 years, but, time travel. I mean, we think right now it's impossible because, again, if space and time were true external barriers, as they are in classical physics, space and time really could not be, you couldn't go back in time. But in fact, that's what all the paradoxes that the grandfather paradox actually are often considered as proof that time travel is impossible. And indeed, with that worldview, that may very well be the case. But in a biocentric universe, it can be achieved simply by changing the algorithms. So I think there are a lot of really exciting things that hopefully will come to pass.
We have had a guest, a physicist by the name of Ron Mallett, who wanted to create a time travel mechanism to go back and see his father, whom apparently he never met. And he was just obsessed with it. He hasn't succeeded yet. But we've seen some strange pictures over the years, Robert, of people, old pictures of, let's say, the 1800s. You'd see a crowd on the street in New York or something like that, and you'd see a guy in the background, and this is not photoshopped, but you'd see a guy in the background looking like he's on his cell phone. And then there was a story of a guy who popped up and got hit by a cab in New York, got killed, and he was wearing 1800 garb, and people are convinced he was a time traveler who showed up in our time era and unfortunately landed on the streets of New York and got hit by a cab. Is that possible?
Well, I'm a scientist, so I'm not in a position to assess something. But some of the things that you're talking about, it could very well be possible. I mean, we're talking about a lot of things that we just simply don't understand, and we're finding out more and more that what scientists, for instance, thought 100 years ago is all wrong, and that there's a lot more going on than science has acknowledged. As a matter of fact, in Observer, in my novel, we go through some of the scenarios about how time travel, how that could happen. We don't invoke time travel in there, but the exact same mechanisms by which they create reality could be used to go back, say, for when the Earth was created, or the Moon was created, when an asteroid hit it. So I think that the technology indeed could happen and is likely in the future to be very real.
You cite a story where the main character, Carol, who you mentioned earlier, is in a bar. What happens there? They're talking about consciousness.
Yeah. So, Carol has been recruited to come to the compound to help them out with their work. And, she's a skeptic. And so she's having a couple of drinks in the bar with a couple of her friends who work there. And so she's trying to get her mind around all of this. And, she says, I still don't understand, they're talking about the bartender and the table. And she says, do you really believe that the bar disappears, when I'm not watching it, when I'm not observing it? And so, I had already mentioned, that it's in the dialogue in a fun way. They explain how, that, the particles have no positions according to any of the experiments until you actually observe them. But one of the things is that, they explain to her that the bar doesn't really disappear when she leaves, that it's sort of like, just to give you an example, when you go into the bar, you're part of the same entangled actuality as anyone else in the bar. So, and also there's a record of that observation in your memory, so that when you return to the bar, your memory obviously will agree with that. Or to put it in a more scientific way, those bar degrees of freedom recorded in the memory collapse the first time you enter the bar. So in essence, and this is what another peer-reviewed paper I recently had with another couple theoretical physicists was, where we actually showed that consensus reality freezes things. So in this case, it would freeze the bar no matter, whether we walk away from it or not. So, one way I like to think about it is that it doesn't really disappear when you leave the room. So you can think of it like one of those old-fashioned TV sets. It's all static and snow.
Yeah,
you adjust it, and the image comes into view. But before the adjustments, it's only possibility of a picture. And so it's you that causes it to manifest. But when you turn the TV off, you don't see the image anymore. But someone down the street, a neighbor, is probably tuning in, and so it exists there because there are many observers.
Good point. We're going to take calls next hour with Robert Lanza here on Coast to Coast, so jump aboard and give us your thoughts on science or metaphysical abilities and which way are we going to go in the future. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Don't touch it. In this hour, we're going to take your calls with Robert Lanza as we talk about his book, Observer. It's a fascinating discussion. Jump aboard and share your thoughts with us. And welcome back. George Norrie with you, along with Robert Lanza, as we talk about his latest work called Observer. Who do you think in the long run, Robert, gets us the answers, the metaphysical community or science?
Well, science hasn't done a great job so far.
No.
So I think metaphysics is the ultimate reality. So, in the end, I think that they will penetrate closer to the ultimate reality than a physicist who has been indoctrinated their whole life with certain thoughts. So I vote with the latter.
Tell us your thoughts about quantum physics.
So quantum physics, right now, probably heard a lot about what's going on in terms of the experiments at the micro level. I had mentioned briefly the two-slit experiment where a particle can go through one hole if you watch it, and it goes through more than one hole if you don't. But there are also lots of other things going on in quantum physics. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and if indeed the world was just out there with particles bouncing around, you'd be able to measure all the properties, but you can't. And the same thing goes for entangled particles. It turns out with quantum mechanics, as a matter of fact, the Nobel Prize was just given a few months ago to 3 people for quantum physics. In their experiments, for instance, they showed that these entangled particles could be instantaneously connected even on opposite sides of the galaxy. And so how is it possible that you can have these entangled particles that actually are connected faster than the speed of light and still be there in a manner that suggests there's no space between them and no time influencing their behavior? As a matter of fact, I'll just give you one experiment that I always find very fascinating. Sure. It was a paper, an experiment carried out in the prestigious journal Science, where scientists actually could retroactively change something that had already happened in the past. So as light particles passed the fork in the experimental apparatus, they had to decide whether to behave as particles or waves. But later on, like 50 meters after they passed that fork, scientists could turn a switch on or off. But what the scientists did at that moment, retroactively, you heard that right, determined what that particle did at the fork in the past. And, of course, we live in that same world. But many scientists dismiss all that, and they say, well, that's just the micro world, and our world is completely different. But now there are new experiments where, for instance, I mentioned entangled particles, where, for instance, scientists in China used a satellite to beam entangled particles to cities that were over 1,000 kilometers apart. And it turns out that what happened with the particles in one city instantaneously influenced what happened in the other city. They've even done these entangled experiments now with diamonds, like the ones you would put in your ears. And they're actually showing that molecules, that these huge things called buckyballs, you can send them through this two-slit experiment. You can even do it with particles that are made, compounds that are made up of like 15,000 different elements. And it turns out that, again, if you observe it, they go through one hole or the other. And if you don't, they behave, again, like a wave and go through multiple holes. And, again, the reason is pretty obvious, as we explain, in the book Observer, again, is that reality is a process that involves our consciousness. So lots of exciting things.
And back to death for a moment. Do you believe in reincarnation?
So reincarnation is it's a complicated idea.
Sure.
I believe in a general way, absolutely, in the sense that, again, we're all connected. We're all really, when you die, you don't just die. Yes, you indeed will be experiencing, whether it's an animal or another person, 1,000%. I mean, we're absolutely, like I said, consciousness, space, and time are the only things that we can think of ourselves as separating us from other people and other creatures. So that when you die, indeed, it's really a reboot, and you really will be experiencing whether it's other individuals or other life forms.
Let's go to the phones. We're going to do that for the rest of this hour. We'll start with Jim in Delaware. Welcome to the show. Hey, Jim.
Hey, George, if there's reincarnation, each creature, each species reincarnates as itself. That's what I believe if there is reincarnation. Here's the reason I called. You guys were talking about time travel.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the 70s, we were traveling around North Wilmington where the DuPonts live. And we ended up on the DuPont's property. Well, out of nowhere, this man comes dressed like in the 1900s and says, "Get off the property." And I'm like, we think he just got let off by a time machine coming back to the present. We think DuPont's has the means of time travel, and they keep it among the family.
That's an interesting possibility. They had enough money to do it, Robert.
So I don't think we're quite there, but at some point, of course, if time travel is made feasible, then those people would have that technology. But again, I'm not in a position to assess that particular event. But indeed, I do think ultimately, through biocentric principles, that time travel definitely will be possible. And as a matter of fact, the exact same mechanism that we describe in the book Observer and all those concepts absolutely apply. They could just as easily create the reality from the past to the future, or travel there in terms of places and in times.
If you could travel in time, would you go into the future or go into the past?
Definitely the future. I'd be curious, what's happening.
See, I'd go into the past. I'd want to see Jesus. I'd want to follow him and see the crowd with him and his mystical powers and stuff like that. That would fascinate me.
Well, like I said, I think that, through some of these concepts, I think that those possibilities could be very real.
Let's bring our cell phones so you and I can communicate with each other when you're in the future and I'm in the past. I don't know if they would work. Let's go next to Mayat in the city of New York. Welcome to the show. Hi, Mayat.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Tommy has become sterling, if not platinum, and you're knocking it out of the box with your guest, George, for 2023. But I have some brief comment and a two-part question, and I'll listen over the air. First of all, I love your work. When we think about Hamlet, where was it Horatio who says, or said to him, "There's more in heaven and earth than ever dreamt of," in your philosophy. So you are definitely on the right track. The first part of my question deals with a PBS documentary I saw, and this was some years ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, don't remember, but it was showing that Einstein's first wife, he had an unusual name, something like Marissa, or you might know it, but she was actually signed on to his first theory, and there was a lot of talk in that documentary that she played a key role in bringing him to that first theory. So I'd like to know if you've done any research or had any thoughts on that. The other part of my question is I'd like to know if you're familiar, because I'm a bibliophile, and why we love Coast, because he has so many great authors on, is Michael Bradley, back in 1978, was telling us how at some point we would be getting close to a nuclear confrontation, which we seem to be here. And his book was, one of his books was The Iceman Inheritance, Western man's racism, sexism, and aggression. And I found out as I started to read that, because I didn't read it back in the day and thought I knew it, that he had a previous book called Cronus Man or something along those lines, where Western man's manipulation of time is going to bring us to much disaster. So I'd like to know if you've explored his work. And lastly, I'm looking forward to reading your book. I love novels, especially talking about things that aren't talked about much. Have you thought about doing something around dowsing or what the pendulum represents, which George knows a lot about and understands, where we can actually detect the liars and find water and mineral? And if you have my three-part question, thank you, George. I'll listen over the air. Thanks.
Okay, you want to take a stab at the first one?
Yeah.
I've got the others written down.
Einstein, absolutely, there were lots of people who influenced him and his ideas. He sat in on lectures on one of the great mathematicians of the time who actually suggested the relativity principle as well. It's just that Einstein took it the next step. And also there were other people. Obviously, a great influence in his life early on was Immanuel Kant. So yeah, I'm not at all surprised, and I do believe that lots of people did influence him in terms of his thinking.
Second part was she was talking about Michael Bradley and talking about what you've been talking about, is that's the difference between man and science.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that, a lot of what you were saying, is real. Yeah.
And we do talk a lot about dowsing, and I don't know if you've even got to that point, but some people do incredible things holding sticks and pendulums and things like that. It's strange.
Oh, yeah. Lots of strange things. I'm not too familiar with that, so I'm not in a position to really comment.
Joe, Long Island, New York. Go ahead, Joseph.
Hi, Robert. I have two questions. Congratulations on the book, by the way. And
thank you.
For someone reading this novel that doesn't really have a physics background, what would be a working definition of particles, photons, and the quantum entanglement? And my second question is, I don't know if it applies to your characters, but if you're an observer and then you're a participator, in some way would you be tarnished or stained by your participation, and then you can't revert back to the observer if it's a good and evil situation?
So lots of big questions. In terms of particles and what's going on, I think we know for a fact, absolutely, that all objects, all particles have both a wave and particle nature. And indeed, what I was mentioning earlier on in the program is that it's not just in the quantum world where, a particle, if you observe it, behaves like a particle, and if you don't, it acts like a wave. But even large objects do that as well. So it's different ways you need to measure all of that. But again, I think virtually all objects, all particles have both a particle and a wave nature. And so again, the things that I am describing and what I describe in the book, I think apply to all matter and energy. And then I guess what was the second question was about the observer was...
Right. If you look, for example, on ancient Rome, for example, if I'm an observer, I'm not really participating. But then if I participate, I'm kind of, can I go back to being an independent observer? Or am I, also kind of tarnished by having participated in the debacle,
Yeah, once you observe something, it's frozen. You have an entangled reality with the person you're doing. But that being said, there's a lot more going on, and that is where, in quantum physics, they talk a lot about this aspect where observations can't be predicted absolutely. So instead, there's a range of observations, and each has a different probability. And one of the mainstream explanations, the many worlds interpretation, says that all those possible things correspond to a real reality. Again, the multiverse. So again, in a sense, yes, there will be instances where, in fact, you are able to go to a different have a different outcome or a different situation.
It's fascinating just letting your mind wander, Robert, thinking about all these possibilities, isn't it?
It really is. It's just really mind-boggling. As your previous guest says, there's just more to what's going on than you can ever imagine. I mean, it's really mind-boggling. It's actually beyond what a human being can really comprehend.
First-time caller Randy in Arizona. Hi, Randy. Go ahead, sir.
Hey, George. First-time caller. Been listening to you since 1997.
Thank you.
So,
You've been with us since the beginning.
Yes, way back then. Hey, I had a fantastic question. I've been thinking about it for some time now since I've heard the theory about, the split experiment for your guest. Let's say that you've never been an observer. Let's say you've been locked in a laboratory for 14 years. You've never seen the outside world, nothing, only the scientist in a jumpsuit. And then 13 years later, he takes you outside. Would you still, as an observer, see everything the same as everyone else would?
So actually, a lot of that I addressed in a recent paper that was actually published in the Top Physics Journal, where we actually show that the actual networks of observers actually determine the very structure of space-time itself. So all of reality.
Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah. So I think that whether you're in a room or not, you're certainly eating, you're moving, you're doing things. So, all of the experiences you have, that's all real. And when you go outside the room, that logic will also apply. But again, theoretically speaking, if you could be totally isolated, all kinds of things would be possible. I mean, as a matter of fact, what the paper I had suggests is that you could be pretty powerful. If you think about it, when you're dreaming, there is no other people, no other consensus reality. But it's the same process. In fact, if you think about you're in bed at night, your eyes are closed, but you're experiencing space and time. If space were really a physical object, you wouldn't be able to experience space just like you do during the day. The only difference between your dreams and the ability to float around and to do that is that when you wake up, you're in a consensus reality, and that changes the rules.
And dreams are very powerful, Robert, aren't they?
Absolutely. They're the exact same biophysical process as reality. The only difference between it's the exact same mechanism. As a matter of fact, that's proof that your mind does have the ability to reconstruct all of spatial temporal reality. It's just not a fluke. It's this exact same mechanism that you actually experience reality. So yes, I mean, I think that the only difference between the two is that there are other observers involved when you're awake.
Let's go to Frank in Pennsylvania before the break. Go ahead, Frank.
Hello, sir. I enjoy your show.
Thank you.
I just want to relate a dream that I had. I had it about 30 years ago. It's still very vivid in my mind. I dream every night in color. Anyway, this dream, I was walking around my house around 1956. And I was walking around. There was nobody in the house, but it was exactly like it was at that point in time. Had hardwood floors, sparse furniture.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked around. I looked out the front window, and there was a car of that period out front. And I walked through the house, and I looked out the back window, and everything was like it was. There was a store out back and a few things with no people in it. And I came back into the living room, and a voice talked to me, and it said, "You want to go back to 1956 and start over, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I do." I don't know who the voice was. It was a voice. It was coming down from above me. It was very clear. And it said, sometimes I cry when I do this. I said, yes, that's what I would like to do. And this voice said, "If you want to, you can stay here. Or the other option is there's a voice that's crying out to you down through all the years, and it wants you to stay where you are." And at the time, my wife was sick. And I thought about it, and as much as I wanted to stay in 1956 and start my life over again, I thought, I said, I want to stay, meaning stay where I am now. And as soon as I said that, I woke up, and I was sitting up in bed, and my sick wife was sitting beside me. And that was a dream that I had. I honestly believe that if I had said I want to go back, that I would have gone back to 1956, and I wouldn't know anything about what's happening now.
Wow, and you would have disappeared on us. We're going to come back with final questions with Robert Lanza in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Next hour, Susan Breskman Cosme joins us to talk about hypnotism and fascinating things like that, so make sure you're part of the program. Welcome back to Coast. George Norrie here, back with our final segment with Robert Lanza. His book that we're talking about tonight is called Observer. He has a number of others that you can see on his website, robertlanza.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. What's your next project, Robert?
Good question. So, first we have to see how this novel does, how the Observer does, and then it could either be a sequel or maybe, knock on wood, who knows, maybe a movie.
I think you got a great possibility for that.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you.
Let's go to our friend Jeremy in North Dakota. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello, George. 19 years ago, 1 month and 4 days ago, I was in a near-fatal auto accident. I was immediately in a coma for 2.5 months. Was I living in a different reality in that coma?
Interesting possibility. Are you in a different reality, Robert, in a coma?
So, in fact, again, as I mentioned, even in your dreams, they're real. They're real. It's just a different type of a reality. Where, again, the rules are slightly different. But again, the same spatial temporal reality, same biophysical process applies. So if you're in a coma, just like you are when you're asleep, you're in a different reality for sure.
Cheryl in Washburn, Missouri, welcome to the show. Hello, Cheryl.
Hey, George. I'm glad you're in Missouri right now, St. Louis.
Only for another day, then it's back to Cali for a little bit.
All right, no. Okay. And hey, Dr. Robert Lanza, it's like, this is cool, your book Observer. I did philosophy minor and everything, and as a brain buster, didn't use the Cliff Notes. Anyhow, so it's like Descartes. I think therefore I am. And I do think that at this moment that we have this conversation, any synaptic pathway, grab a consideration or awareness that we just changed the universe. We're part of the universe. And thank you to the Coast to Coast people, and Tommy is a sweetheart. And you too, and thank you all. We just all changed the universe right now. It's a different universe because we all thought this. And you listen.
Well, that's what we've been talking about, Robert. We are all part of the universe, aren't we?
Absolutely. We are the universe. I mean, everything you observe and see, that is part of the observer-determined reality. Yes.
What if we are in a matrix, a created matrix, and there's like some kid on a computer in another world doing his thing?
Well, I hear a lot about that, and it's sort of a fun idea. I don't think you need to think of that. I think lots of that are real, lots of those components about a matrix. We are indeed in a matrix, and it's the life is everything matrix. And we're not in this random board ball, dumb particle matrix. So I think that there is indeed things along the lines of the matrix that are very real.
And talking about very real, when we go to sleep, assuming we do not remember our dreams, we're out of it for the amount of time we're asleep. It's almost like we're dead, isn't it?
Yeah, but you're not. You're not. You're actually experiencing a reality. I mean, and as a matter of fact, I don't know about your dreams, but my dreams are just as real and vivid as during the day. I remember a dream not long ago where I'm on the beach and I could feel the pebbles under my feet. I could see out the ships out on the water, three-dimensional. So I was experiencing space and time and reality. I could smell the ocean. Everything was just as real. And again, it's the exact same process. That's not an accident.
Next up, let's go to Marcia, Los Gatos, California. Marcia, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, George. And can you throw me back to Tommy after we're done here?
I sure can, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Richard, I just am so grateful to hear about your book, The Observer. I am an observer, and I come from a science background, but I have such a strong connection with the metaphysical now with an experiment I'm doing as an observer. I'm viewing, I guess it's called scrying. I'm throwing my consciousness onto a reflective surface, and then I'm taking pictures of what comes up on the mylar. And you can take a magnifying glass and you can look down to the smallest parts, and there's a whole nother world in there. Absolutely unbelievable. I believe that God has given us so much ability to create every possible thing needed in our world. Just like a child can create a face, a true feeling of a face, if you draw it on a picture and hold that face and see the child move its head and follow that face. Can you tell me what that brings up in your mind, Richard?
Robert, close enough. Again, as Observer, the book says, it all depends on the observer. So everything is, you are the one who are creating it. So again, you determine what happens, and there are lots and lots of almost infinite possibilities. So I think there's absolutely a lot of truth to many of the things that you're saying.
Okay, absolutely. Dave in Sacramento, California on the wild card line. Hello, David.
Hey, George. Thanks for taking the call. Dr. Lanza, really an honor to speak with you. I read Biocentrism twice and everything since then. And one thing that stuck in my mind, and I always did want to ask you, so this is a great opportunity, was about the nature of consciousness, what you think of that. Is that conscious observer has to be a human consciousness? Could it be animal, microorganism? And then also, I loved your second part of the question. I guess I loved your analogy about the record needle falling on the record, and that's kind of a point in time that we're being able to understand in the material world. But do you think that consciousness is more of a ethereal kind of element in the Ethernet, just floating around, and then we connect to it, kind of like a browser to the Internet? So those are my two questions on the nature of consciousness. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So your first question is why the whole reason the theory is called biocentrism is because the bio refers to life. And so it's not just human consciousness. Your dog has consciousness. Your cat has consciousness. All your pets. So indeed, in one of my previous books too, and as we explain in the novel as well here, that, again, it applies to all life. Any creature that has consciousness operates with the same spatial temporal logic. And in terms, I'm trying to think of your second question about whether consciousness is serial, or is that your question, how it connects?
Yeah, is consciousness kind of around us, and then our minds are sort of the browser that connects to that wireless connection, that Internet out there?
Yeah.
And
so again, it's basically, everything is possibility. It's just basically what I do in my most recent paper. We call it in physics. It's called quantum foam. So that is out there, but again, as I mentioned in the analogy, it's that the image comes into view. That is where you actually cause things to manifest. Again, the observer is what collapses what they call the waves of probability. And another way to think about it is you're watching your DVD, and when the player is off, there's no movie. But when you return to the room and you turn your player on, it leaps back into 3D. So whether you turn it on or off, the movie doesn't really change. Emerald City is always at the end of Yellow Brick Road. So again, the reality is there. You only can experience it, though, piece by piece, and very much along the analogy of the TV set I mentioned.
I've always believed, Robert, that we are living in a wireless network where we're all connected, strangely, telepathy, whatever you want to call it, but it's like a wireless network.
Yeah. I mean, actually, if you think about it, if space and time, as Einstein showed, have no absolute reality, in what sense can we think of ourselves as being separate from one another? In fact, that's what all these entanglement experiments have been showing, is that we are all connected. Those particles are connected, and in fact, that's enough so that the Nobel Prize was awarded to these three gentlemen for exactly that work just a few months ago.
Let's go to Johnny in Rhode Island, east of the Rockies. Hey, Johnny, go ahead.
Hey, how's it going, George?
Okay.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. I haven't been able to get an answer to this, and I think maybe your guest can help me understand this a little bit.
All right.
So he was talking about, like, the observer, or I'm not sure if that's the same as the God particle or not, but my question was, like, the whole Big Bang thing. How was the Big Bang created if there wasn't anything around to observe it? Or, like, is it all self-aware, or, like, do you get what I'm trying to say? Like,
oh, yeah.
No, absolutely. So when you think of the Big Bang or you think of anything, what you have to remember is that those are ideas, those are concepts. So right now, when you think about your body, it's made up of molecules, for instance, carbon. But carbon, we know that if you trace the logic of that carbon, that's a fossil that was created in the heart of exploding supernova. But just because those things are the logic of space and time, it doesn't mean that they're actually manifest until they're observed. So if you were to go back in time to your existence, so right now you're talking on the phone, you're sitting on, in a room in the United States, then that's on the planet, which is going around the sun. And if you extend that logic, you go all the way in space to the edge of the universe. Or if you go back in time, you will go all the way back to the supernova that created the carbon. And if you go back further in that logic, if indeed you could observe it and go back, you would indeed come to the very end of that spatial temporal logic, which is the Big Bang. So basically, it's evolution in reverse. So basically, the observer is the decisive factor. And even Stephen Hawking, the famous physicist, said that the past and the present exist only in superposition, and that's again what Einstein was basically saying, which means that until you are in the present and you observe something, that those only then does the logic of the past and then indeed your future really come into play. So the Big Bang is really the end of the spatial temporal logic of the self.
Do you even think there was a Big Bang, Robert?
So the Big Bang is very much a spatial temporal logic. So if you were to think of what the explanation is for your existence, and you were to trace that logic, you would go all the way back to the Big Bang. But we've got it wrong. We've got it totally in reverse. The Big Bang didn't just magically appear out of nowhere and create everything. It's the reverse. It starts with the observer, and if you trace the spatial temporal logic to explain the self, you trace it all the way back to the Big Bang in terms of time, and then in terms of space, you go all the way down into the quantum world, where in fact you find exactly what we've been talking about, where it basically exists as just possibility as quantum foam.
First time caller Jason in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Hey, Jace, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, George and
morning.
Robert.
Hi there.
I have a question about premonitions and directly about dreams being related to reality. Robert, you mentioned earlier that they can mimic reality, and you also hinted, I believe, at manifestation earlier as well. I am 29 years old, and I've been having premonitions for over 20 years, and I have seen most of them come to pass.
Wow.
So, I believe that all people have the ability to have a premonition of one sort or another, but why are people more than others
tuned
able
in?
To have those? Are they more connected to reality, or do they end up manifesting their premonitions?
Yeah, I mean, very good question. Unfortunately, I don't have any direct knowledge about that directly, so I couldn't really give you any further insight than you may already have. Sorry about that.
I do believe that some people have better inherent abilities than others, though, Robert, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, people definitely have various intuitions, which, intuition is a very powerful part of reality. So definitely there are differences there, for sure.
Robert, as we wrap things up here, for folks who want to go to your website, what do they see when they get there?
So there are a couple websites. My main website would be my professional website, which tells you about my background. I think at the beginning it does mention Observer. The one thing I should point out to your readers, though, or listeners, I should say, is that if you go to Amazon for Observer, a novel, there's a little box you can click and you get 40% off. Don't forget that. And also the Amazon gives you 18%, so you'll get 58% off. So anyone who does go to Amazon for looking at Observer, to click that coupon, make sure and get that 40%.
Super. Robert, thank you for being on the program again, and you take care, and you're invited back anytime you want, my friend.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Up next, we're going to be talking about hypnotism and special things that have happened to people who have been undergone hypnotism with a special expert on Coast to Coast. So make sure you're part of the program. And then, of course, in our last hour, we do the same thing. We open up the phone lines here on Coast to Coast AM. And also don't forget to sign up for our free YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, type in Coast to Coast AM official in the search bar. It's all free. Become one of 500,000 plus Up members.
Next,
Sarah Breskman Cosme joins us, a hypnotist. She's got a number of books out, including A Hypnotist's Journey to the Secrets of the Sphinx, A Hypnotist's Journey from the Trail to the Star People, A Hypnotist's Journey to Atlantis. But we're going to be talking with her about all these things in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Sarah Breskman Cosme is a master hypnotist, a level 3 practitioner of the late Dolores Cannon, a student of Dr. Brian Weiss. Sarah has a passion to reveal hidden or undiscovered knowledge vital to the enlightenment of humanity. Sarah, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, George. Thanks for having me.
I miss Dolores Cannon. She was one of a kind, wasn't she?
Oh, my gosh, I know. She's amazing. And sometimes she even comes through sessions, which is really fantastic.
She's still with us in spirit, isn't she?
Well, she loves the work that she created. And, you know, she says that she helps her practitioners or anybody, you know, who asks.
And Dr. Brian Weiss, he's one of a kind. I love that guy.
He is so sweet. He was my first teacher, and he really helped me really understand, you know, the universe. He's fantastic.
You're kind of different as a hypnotist, because on one hand, you're a hypnotist. We're going to talk about that. But on the other hand, you're very enlightened and spiritual, and you kind of mix them together, don't you?
Yeah, well, the work that I do is so fascinating. I mean, I find out so much stuff, and that's why I'm so passionate about sharing it, because I feel like if people even understood a little bit about the information I receive, they'd be so much less stressed, so much less worried, because I have access to all this amazing information. And how would other people find out about this stuff if I don't share it?
The only other way they would do it is if they died and went to the other side or something, huh?
Right.
And there's no sense doing that yet. How did you get involved in hypnotism?
You know, just through my own suffering, having so many problems, I just wanted to find a solution to fix myself. And eventually I got into hypnosis, and that was, you know, the easiest, quickest way. I've just always been one of those people that, you know, wants a quick, easy fix, and I couldn't find anything until I found hypnosis. Hypnosis is just such a great method. You can really change so many things about yourself very quickly. I really feel like it's the new way. It's just easier. I mean, there's so many things you can do with hypnosis. You can find out who you really are. You can find out your true purpose, and you can even heal your body very easily, because what hypnosis is actually just focused, deep concentration. So you focus deeply inwards. You're focusing in on yourself. And you can find out anything in that way. You're just quieting your mind a little bit. You know, people don't really understand what it feels like to be in hypnosis, but what it feels like is it's the same state that you go in and out of, like when you wake up in the morning and you still have access to your dream. In that state, that's deep hypnosis. That's the theta state. And you can find out anything, but it feels like you're awake. So it's kind of, you know, a misconception that you're going to be unconscious.
I've always been told that you cannot hypnotize somebody to do something they don't want to do. Is that true?
That is totally correct. You can't make somebody do something against their will. So, like these fun stage hypnosis shows, those people on some level agree to do that. Those are so fun. I love doing that.
What about people's ills like smoking, they drink too much? Will hypnotism really be able to cure that?
Only if they also want to quit. So it's just like you can't force somebody to do something against their will. If someone's not ready to quit, then, you really can't get them to quit through hypnosis. It has to be somebody who's willing and ready. But, hypnosis is great because you can find out the root cause of the reason why they do these things. And that's really what I feel like is the best thing about hypnosis. Because you can really go inward.
What techniques, Sarah, do you use to hypnotize people?
Oh, well, I use Dolores Cannon's method of quantum healing hypnosis technique. And that's the method that I use, every day, because I do this work almost every single day. And it's very easy. Really, all it is people are just quieting their mind a little bit. So they get in a very deep, relaxed state. And then I bring them to the very deepest level of trance. And then we go through a past life or lives or wherever, they go or are shown. And then I access their all-knowing, all-loving aspect of themselves, the higher consciousness. But what's really fascinating to me, George, is that when you take anyone through this process and you go deep within anyone, you reach the same place. You reach universal consciousness. And in that way, that's how I find out all this information. You can access anything in that state, and it's through each person. So essentially, when people talk about us all being one, it's really true. We are all one. You can tap into that field through hypnosis. It's really fascinating.
We've got a lot of people driving, truck drivers, and people driving at night, so let's not hypnotize them while they're driving, right? Do you do it with your voice, or do you have a little pendulum or something like that?
No, I use my voice, and I basically just take them through a series of relaxation. It's like a relaxation exercise. And so first they start to feel kind of heavy in the chair, and then their eyes feel, okay, I don't want to hypnotize anyone. I feel tired. And they feel very relaxed, and then they sink even deeper than that. And when they do that, their mind opens up, and they can find out anything. So, when Dolores was working, it was really interesting because when Dolores was doing her work, this information was just so unacceptable. So it was almost hidden more, and you had to go deeper to find it. It wasn't just available. But now it's so exciting because this information is everywhere. I mean, it's just so fascinating. But what I think is one of the things that never gets old is how people can heal themselves with hypnosis, because basically a lot of what we don't understand about our bodies is that we've never really learned is that our bodies are messengers. So anytime you have any kind of physical issue, it's really a message for us to look inwards and figure out what the message is. So whatever it is, we're supposed to get this message. And then once we get the message, it can be released and healed. And it can be very simple. People heal all kinds of things just by getting the message. Like, just for instance, sometimes some of my clients will have like a right foot injury or right leg injury, and the body is so literal. And literally what these type of things mean is that you're either not going in the right direction, or the feet, maybe you don't feel stable currently in your current life. The right side of the body is usually stuff happening right now, and the left side of the body is usually the past, whether the past in this current life or the past in a different lifetime. The body is so literal. I mean, sometimes some of my clients will have issues with their hands, and it's really fascinating because their higher consciousness will say, oh, that's because they're holding on too tightly to either the past or to things going on right now. I mean, it's amazing how literal the body is. And eye issues, oftentimes, it's because people don't want to see something,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they don't want to see clearly what's going on around them. Hearing a lot, either, sometimes it depends on which ear, but sometimes if it's the right ear, it means someone's like yelling or saying things they don't really want to hear in this current life. So the body is sending them a message. And when you tune into your body, you can figure out what it is that the body's sending you based on where it is in your body that you have an issue. Like, for instance, excuse me, like lungs. Like, a lot of times people have lung issues because of stored grief. They haven't fully processed grief, like lung cancer or any kind of lung issues are oftentimes just the body's way of telling you, look, you have more grief to, release from your body. It's really interesting, all this information that comes out in these sessions and how easy it is for people to heal themselves when they tune into themselves.
Sirhan, the convicted assassin of Robert F. Kennedy, listens to this show quite often, by the way. He's probably listening tonight. And, of course, a parole board recommended he be paroled. Some of the Kennedy members and the family recommended it, but the governor of California nixed it, so he's still in prison. But he has always said he doesn't recall what happened. And he was there, he had a gun in his hand, but there could have been other shooters and, who knows what. But my point is, could he have been hypnotized to do what they allege that he did and convicted him?
That's interesting, because you can't hypnotize somebody to do something against their will.
Well, what if he wanted to do it, but he was afraid to do it or something? I mean, a lot of people would say to you, I would do this, but they don't do it.
Right. Well, there's also programming as far as mind control, which happens all around us all the time. And I guess, in a sense, if they were programmed from to want to do it, then it would be possible, yes.
I mean, wanting to do it and actually doing it are two different things. But if the person deep down inside, let's say he had a hatred for Robert Kennedy. Sirhan was, he's Palestinian. He had his gripes. He thought Robert F. Kennedy was not favoring the Palestinian people. So what if he, in his head, says, I could kill him? But he really wouldn't go through it. But under hypnosis, would that make that happen?
Well, it really depends, but you could find out. I mean, you could hypnotize him and take him to the scene and see what happened. I've had clients that come in.
That's interesting. If he'd have to be willing to do that, obviously.
He would. But I have had clients that have come in just for that purpose. I had one client to come in. She came in because she wanted to find out how her uncle was murdered. And it was really interesting because when I brought her under hypnosis, she found out, and this is what's really fascinating about hypnosis and tapping into that field. You can find out anything.
Do you tell the truth? Do you tell the truth under hypnosis?
Yes.
Okay, and what did she find out?
She found out that her uncle wasn't intentionally murdered. It was a party. There were a bunch of people at a party, and it was an accident. And so somebody was drunk. They backed their car into him. He was getting into his car, and it was an accident, and they didn't know what to do, so they covered it up. And she also was able to find out the names of people. So the next day everything is confidential, but the next day I got a call from an investigator. But I'm not allowed to say anything. I'm not allowed to.
I understand.
Things totally personal.
There's a little client privilege there, right?
Of course.
But that would be interesting if you could hypnotize Sirhan, take him back to 1968 during that event, and explain what's going on. I mean, maybe he would say there were two other shooters there or something. Is that possible?
Well, of course. Oh, definitely, of course. And it's very easy. You just bring the person back into that time, and they can look around and find out what's happening.
When somebody's hypnotized, are they like asleep? Are their eyes open or closed?
That's a really great question. No, they're not asleep at all. In fact, it's akin to deep meditation. So they have awareness of everything. They have more awareness than when they're asleep. It's like if you are really focusing on a daydream, say you just really get into this daydream and you're focusing in on it. You can find out more and more about what it is that you're seeing in your daydream, and you just go deeper into it, and the rest of the world kind of fades away, and you're not really paying attention to the rest of the world. It's sort of like that. It feels like a daydream. You can really focus in and find out anything, but you're not asleep. That's a big misconception. You're not unconscious.
But eyes open or closed?
Sometimes people's eyes open, but it really doesn't matter. Most people feel they can tune in better and deeper with their eyes closed, but it doesn't matter.
I remember back in the early television days, a hypnotist would be on TV variety shows and would hypnotize 10 people lined up. Remember, they'd bring them all up on stage, and they'd make them dance like ducks and sing and like chickens and stuff like that. It was hilarious.
Uh-huh. Oh, I love that stuff.
Was that real?
Oh yeah, I used to do that a little bit. It was really fun.
You used to quack like a duck or hypnotize people?
No, I used to hypnotize people. I used to for a little while. I wanted to be a stage hypnotist, and it was just a lot of fun. But I really like the healing aspect more, and I really want to help people as much as I can. So that's why I chose, Dolores Cannon's method.
We're with Sarah Breskman Cosme. How long does it take to hypnotize somebody?
Well, the method that I use, Dolores Cannon's method, it's about a 5-hour session because they're so intense.
5 hours? Whoa. Is that 5 hours of questioning the person or 5 hours to put them under?
No, putting them under is very easy and quick, but the whole session takes about 5 hours because in the beginning, you go over the person's life and you find out everything that ever happened to them, basically like the significant things. And you do that because you want to know what questions to ask their subconscious, their higher self. And that way you can really make sense of their life. And then the actual session takes about 2 hours. I try not to keep people under for more than 2 hours because people feel sort of groggy if it's longer than that. So I try to stick to 2 hours.
Will somebody come out of it on their own, or do they need you to pull them out of it?
Oh, no, you can come out of it on your own. But, of course, I always take a lot of precautions.
Because here's an example. You've got somebody hypnotized. They're deep into this hypnotized state, and you die sitting there for some reason. Sadly enough, you pass on. Are they going to be okay?
Oh, of course. They'll either be so deep that they go to sleep for a little bit and then wake up, or they'll just wake up. They would wake up
and see you dead and not know what happened, right?
No, they would know. They would be able to figure it out. No, it's not that you get stuck into hypnosis or anything like that. It's the same state that you go through when you're waking up in the morning. So in that in-between state, you feel as if you're fully awake, but you're not. That's deep hypnosis. That's it. So they would just wake up all the way.
I mean, if you were yelling to them to help me, I'm passing out, please help me. Could they snap out of it and help you?
It depends. It might take them a little while to kind of figure out what's going on because they are in that state. But, most of the time, I don't think it would take very long at all because they do have more awareness. But it does feel a little groggy when you're coming out. It's just like when you're waking up in the morning. Some people don't take a little while to fully wake up, and it's the same thing. Same for people coming out of hypnosis. They might feel a little groggy, a little bit out of it, for just a couple minutes.
Sarah's website is called theholistichypnotist.com. It's linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Sarah, when we come back after the break, let's talk about some of your books next. If you've ever been hypnotized, check in with us next hour. If you have a question for Sarah, we'll be taking calls next hour. Sarah, let's talk a little bit about some of your books. And you've written a lot over the last couple of years, haven't you?
Yes, I've written 3 books. It's just so fascinating, this information that comes through, and it all seems to come by accident because I never set out to learn any of this stuff at all. I didn't know anything about aliens or like Atlantis or any of this stuff. And it's almost like the higher consciousness has an agenda because essentially I'm not the one writing the books. All this information just comes through my clients.
So let's talk about the one book, A Hypnotist's Journey from the Trail to the Star People, which you wrote last year. Who are the Star People?
Well, the Star People, I'm calling them the Star People, but the Native Americans and the indigenous cultures called them the Star People. And essentially, they're basically, the way I've come to understand it is everything in this universe is happening now. The time doesn't really exist in the rest of the universe. So everything that has happened and everything that will happen is happening now. So essentially, there's many different beings that are us in the future that are here now coming to check on us. Because so oftentimes I'll have a client deep under hypnosis and they remember having contact with, say, an extraterrestrial. And then as they're under hypnosis, they realize that that extraterrestrial being is them, coming to check on them and maybe doing repairs or checking up to make sure they're existing okay on this earth plane. It's really fascinating because, a lot of times people don't realize that the beings that are us in the future are very advanced and they want the best for us. So I really think, I've come to understand from so many sessions, the Star People are just us.
From the future or when?
Well, us in a different, it's almost like a parallel timeline, us more advanced. So essentially the soul splits off into many different fragments to have multiple experiences at once. So just like I said, when I hypnotize one person, I access universal consciousness. In a sense, we're all one, but we split out into all these different, fragments to have so many different experiences. So I would say Star People are us more advanced on other planets, other realms, other dimensions.
What about the alien grays, Sarah, that we hear so much about?
Well, a lot of my clients that have contact with grays, and there seems to be so many different types of grays. But from what my clients say under hypnosis about gray extraterrestrials, they usually describe them like this, that they have like an avatar body. It's not a real body. And you can tell the difference between a gray extraterrestrial and, say, like an even extraterrestrial because the way my clients describe it, even extraterrestrials have pupils, so they have an actual physical body, but gray extraterrestrials do not have a physical body. They have soul energy. And the gray extraterrestrials that come in through my clients or my clients have a parallel life as a gray extraterrestrial, they realize under hypnosis, say that they want to help humanity, essentially, because what they did was they bred out their emotions thinking that they were a hindrance. They felt as a collective that who wants to deal with grief, who wants to deal with upset feelings, and so they thought, well, to be more efficient, let's breathe this out and then go more advanced with our technology. But what happened was because they did that, they realized that their emotions actually were something within them that created a lot of power. And so it was sort of a mistake. So they're trying to redo everything. And essentially, it's because some of them consider themselves to be the future versions of us. They're trying to make amends for their mistakes. In a sense, there are no mistakes because everything is a learning experience, and this whole realm, this Earth planet especially, is considered an experiment, so there are no mistakes really. But that is what the gray extraterrestrials say when they come through clients, that they want to help humanity because helping humanity also helps them, helps their timeline. And basically what happened to them was their planet So us on one timeline in the future, the planet was destroyed because we went too far with our technology and we bred out our emotions. And then because our planet was destroyed, we lived in space. And if you look at like a gray extraterrestrial, that's what they said humans would look like after a millennia in space. You know, you kind of don't need, because there's no gravity, your body kind of stretches out so you're longer. You know, your eyes are darker because you have, you know, you don't have light. But they live aboard ships. They do have some planets, which is really interesting, that they're seeding and trying to rebuild. And one is like a moon, which is really interesting. And when you go into this planet that they're rebuilding, it's really fascinating, their technology. Their technology is so interesting to me. It's like they use propulsion technology, but they also use their mind and their body to create like a circuit of energy. And it looks like, according to my clients, it looks like a child made this because it's not fancy at all. Not at all, because so much of it is done with the mind. And when my clients go board these gray extraterrestrial ships, it's really interesting because they have like these like holographic TV type looking things. It look like a big sphere. And in this hologram, they can find out different information about the different missions they're on, because a lot of times their missions will be to work with certain individuals on Earth. And, you know, it's really interesting because a lot of people, I mean, I can't tell you how many people are contacted by extraterrestrials. And I even asked the subconscious, the higher self one time, how many people are contacted? And they said all people are contacted, especially people working on themselves in some way, you know, because it's important during this evolution of consciousness. But anyway, some people are more connected with gray extraterrestrials, and they've been, ever since they were little, been part of this like gray extraterrestrial schooling where they don't remember this consciously, but they're shown different secrets of the universe, which I find really fascinating. You know, just the history of the planets and the history of, you know, what we're doing here. And they're being shown these things so that they can, you know, subconsciously have this information within them. They don't need to know it consciously right now, but it's really just so interesting. Another thing I find really interesting was I used to have, about a year ago, I started having these women that were postmenopausal coming in for a session, and they claimed to feel pregnant. And this was interesting because they had already gone through menopause, and it was impossible for them to be pregnant. And many of them, if not all of them, had gone to their doctor to find out, you know, why they had this feeling of pregnancy. And the doctor would do a scan and wouldn't find anything. And one of them said they put her on, you know, an antidepressant, whatever. So they come in for a session, and their higher self, their subconscious, said they were pregnant because they were seeding this other earth. So according to the higher consciousness that comes through my clients, we as a collective always need a backup planet. And so there's one in particular that's being seeded right now, which is, some people call it the new Earth, or another planet that we are seeding that many, not all of us, but many are planning on going to after we're done this incarnation, which is another planet that is a lot less dense than this planet, with less problems. And I'm not talking about the people ascending on this current planet. This is another planet, which it seems very interesting that we have so many different choices of where we want to experience, you know, our incarnations. Really interesting.
Now, one of your other books, of course, is called The Hypnotist's Journey to the Secrets of the Sphinx. What is that secret?
Well, this is so interesting because the Sphinx is older than the pyramids, according to my clients. The Sphinx has been around since the beginning of everything. And the Sphinx, what it was it was almost like created to be a record keeper because it magnifies and harnesses energy. And it was built on top of this rock that came from a different place, almost like an asteroid crashing into Earth. And when this rock, this special rock, crashed into the Earth, it embedded itself. And it's a very powerful, special rock. And that's what they used to build the Sphinx. But it didn't look like it does now. It didn't have the face of a man, according to my clients. It used to look almost like a lion. It had the face of a jungle cat because the Sphinx, this specific monument was made to look like one of the apex predators in the area. So the face was changed almost symbolically with like the takeover of this presence of greed and masculine power.
I had heard that the face used to be a lion.
Yes, that's funny. Yeah, that's what my clients have shared with me when they're deep under hypnosis. Kind of lionish, like not full lion, but more like a jungle cat, if that makes sense, with a boxy face. So it does look like a lion, but what they said was it was like a jungle cat. But it's interesting because the Sphinx is like, it's also broadcast out. So it stores all the information and everything that's happening on this planet like a record keeper. And it shares it with many different places, many other planets and realms. And some of my clients that have been to these other realms notice that there are not Sphinx-like structures that look like the Sphinx, but other structures like the Sphinx that are broadcasting back to the Sphinx. So it's almost like a big communication device so that, we can keep track of other places and other places can keep track of us to see how we're doing with this evolution of consciousness, which is so important to the whole universe right now.
Robert Schrock has said that the Sphinx is definitely much older than most people think, and he uses erosion on it and stuff like that as evidence. But so you may be onto something there, Sarah.
Well, that's very confirming. That's at least what my clients say, multiple clients. And what's interesting is these people don't know one another. So I don't know how many sessions I've done over the years and find out the same information from so many different people, but how would they know? I mean, my first client the way I got into doing all this, she didn't know any of this stuff. She was a teacher at the kids' school where my kids go to school, and I just needed somebody to regress. And so I asked her, and she wasn't into any of this stuff. In fact, she didn't believe in extraterrestrials. She told me she didn't believe in them, and she didn't believe in any of this stuff, but she just wanted to heal herself. So she found out that she had a past life as an extraterrestrial, which to me was very confirming because I knew she didn't believe in any of this stuff. And she detailed why she came to Earth, and they were running out of this specific mineral on their planet that it had depleted, the resources had depleted. And the way, she described, even the way she looked is the same as my other clients. So many of my clients, when they describe or remember being an extraterrestrial, they describe, it depends on which kind of extraterrestrial, they describe the same, jumpsuit. It's like a very feels like a dolphin skin material. And, she described herself exactly the way other clients have described themselves as an extraterrestrial, and coming on Earth for the first time was so interesting to hear from somebody who didn't believe in extraterrestrials. And she remembered that when she was under hypnosis, she remembered that she had planned to come to Earth, and it was so confusing. Earthlings are so confusing because they eat, and that was so foreign to them. And also they have gravity, which they didn't have on that planet. They would kind of like glide. And then, it was so many things that she had to learn. They had school to teach these extraterrestrials how to live or how to be on Earth. Because when you come into a physical body on Earth, you have to agree to certain rules if you're going to incarnate on Earth. So knowing that she was going to be in a physical body, she had to learn these things, because essentially her mission And it was interesting because she described like her jumpsuit had like a certain symbol on it, which meant she was part of Mission Earth. And her mission was to help seed the population because Earth is this kind of like experimental place. It's where souls come to be a part of this experimentation process. So she came to Earth to help with the seeding of this planet. And it was really, really interesting. So, yes, I can't tell you how much confirming information I get. And I always find it fascinating that the people don't know one another.
Interesting. Now, you also had another book, which we'll talk about when we come back and take calls in just a moment, but this had to do with Atlantis. And I would want you to tell us, Sarah, what kind of technology you think they had a long, long time ago. Back in a moment with calls on Coast to Coast. Well, this hour we'll take your calls with Sarah Breskman Cosme as we talk about hypnotism and jump on board and share questions. Maybe you've been hypnotized. Tell us what that was like. And welcome back, George Norrie with Sarah Breskman Cosme as we talk about hypnotism. Sarah, you wrote a book 2 years ago called The Hypnotist's Journey to Atlantis. What did you uncover about Atlantis?
Oh, my gosh, George. It was so fascinating. Atlantis was super advanced, obviously, as many people can still sort of remember deep within their memories. It was interesting that they harnessed the power of certain crystals. And Atlantis was kind of set up so that it had these, it almost looked like small pyramids with a crystal inside that, I don't know if you've ever seen a Vogel tool, a Vogel crystal, but it's shaped with like a point at the end in the middle. And basically it was the way that they powered their devices, many of their devices. They used stem cells when they would heal people and certain lights and frequencies and sound. They were very advanced with their healing technologies.
Did they have flying apparatuses too, Sarah?
They did, and the way they would power these flying apparatuses was they would use propulsion energy too. It was almost like it looked like a fan underneath their hovering ships, and it would suck the energy, the free energy, the energy all around in the Earth. It would suck this energy up, and they described it as the same energy that comes out of a volcano or like a mountain, sort of like a fissure in the mountain. There's this energy. So they would suck this same energy. It's all around, but it's more potent than volcanoes and stuff like that. But they would suck it up with these big, it looked like fans. It would come in through the ship, and it would sort of like propel it around. It wouldn't, so it would kind of like hover, so to speak. And that's also what they used to power their ships. They didn't have any like gasoline or anything like that. It was with the ships, it seems like they would suck this, and use like a steam engine, and it would suck the energy into this device that they had like a magnet. The way my clients described it was like a magnet, and this energy would come in, and then it would propel the ship outward using steam. It's really interesting. They had all kinds of interesting technology, and they even had something so that people could experience breathing underwater. They were able to oxygenate the water in one of the rings of Atlantis, so people could experience kind of like scuba diving, but without the equipment because the water was oxygenated. And they had they used the rings for many different reasons. So Atlantis had 3 rings. There was an outer ring, a middle ring, and then an inner ring, an inner circle, and there were moats around. This is just the city. Atlantis was very, very large, but the city of Atlantis, where the Bermuda Triangle is now, looked like different moats with different rings, and they would also take the salt water and they would propel the salt out. They used a lot of propulsion energy. But it was really interesting when I was learning about Atlantis because I never set out to learn about Atlantis at all. I didn't even know anything about it. And it was amazing because so many people kept having memories of a past life in Atlantis. There were so many people. So it seems like a lot of us, most of us walking the planet today have had a past life in Atlantis or Lemuria, one of those two ancient places, or multiple lives in both of these places, because so much of what we're doing now is kind of like a recreation of these time periods. And basically, there was too much masculine greed in Atlantis towards the very end of Atlantis. And then there needed to be a rebalancing of this. So that's one of the things that collectively we're doing is rebalancing the masculine and feminine aspects within our, society and planet right now. It's really, really interesting. I find, all these things that I learned from these people.
How did the continent sink, Sarah?
Well, what I've learned, and this is one timeline, so it's almost like the Mandela effect, where not everyone remembers the same past. There are multiple timelines, but the timeline that I was supposed to report on was Atlantis sunk during the kind of fight amongst Lemuria. So Lemuria was destroyed first with these massive tidal waves. The Atlanteans wanted these special crystals that the Lemurians had, and they could not give them to the Atlanteans because these crystals were gifts from the star people, and they were not allowed to give them to the Atlanteans because the Atlanteans were dealing with a lot of sickness. Because of their experiments, they were dealing with a lot of sickness in their civilization, so they wanted some type of immunity. And the Lemurians had a lot of immunity because it was a gift from the star people, these special crystals that were able to protect them and give them this immunity. And when the Lemurians refused to give the special crystals over, the Atlanteans took one of them as a prisoner and destroyed the whole continent. And a lot of my clients remember this huge wave.
And they all say similar things?
Yes, they all say very similar things. It's really quite fascinating. So a lot of times I'll go places and speak about this, and I'll share clips of my clients deep under hypnosis recounting this same information. It's really interesting. But yes, they all say similar things, that this is how it was destroyed. And many people still have memories of this great wave that destroyed the Lemurian civilization. And Atlantis was just destroyed with a misfiring of their crystals. And there were many, many explosions, and some people, unfortunately, have a lot of trauma from that as well, as Atlantis was destroyed. But in one sense, there is no bad in the universe. So all of this happened for a reason. This has all been kind of planned out, so to speak. When people look at these civilizations from a higher perspective, they realize that it was all meant to be to bring us to this current timeline, because so much has happened to bring us to where we are now so we can experience this Earth's ascension, this evolution of consciousness.
How close do they echo what Plato said about Atlantis?
I never research anyone else. I don't get my information from anyone at all. And I honestly don't really know what he said about Atlantis. I only know what I receive from my own clients who are deep under hypnosis.
And if you had 10 clients and 9 of them say the same thing, you have to assume something's going on here.
That's how I get my information. I just go by that. And I never research other people's stuff. I just purely go with what comes through my own sessions. And that way I don't, get swayed one way or the other. And I don't look for any of the information. The information comes, and that's the only way I can keep things valid. And also, I try not to research other people's information as well because I don't want to be biased.
What about the holographic universe? Where does that fit in?
Well, a lot of my clients under hypnosis describe the holographic universe, that we are literally creating our own reality. I mean, so many times I've asked clients, is the Earth flat or round? And, it's interesting because they say it can be either, depending on a person's perception. But most people describe it as a realm. So basically, each person is rendering what they see around them based on their own perception. It's really interesting. This is a holographic universe, and many people describe that And the extraterrestrials, especially the gray extraterrestrials, when they're teaching a lot of these people under hypnosis, they share this symbol with them. It's like a circle with a dot in the middle, and even underneath their extraterrestrial ships, the lights form a circle with a dot in the middle, and it's to remind people that you have your own perspective, like you have a spot within this sphere of reality, and you're creating in all times, but essentially you come from source. You have the power. You are source. And it's like it's a very interesting, all these symbols, all this sacred geometry, they're actually keys, and they're coded to relay information to us. So if you look at, say, crop circles or the symbol that oftentimes the gray extraterrestrials use, it's coded to share information with us. And it doesn't take much to get this information. All you have to do is look at it. You might not understand it consciously, but it does something to your mind. It's expanding your mind. It's actually very healthy to use these symbols.
Are we real, Sarah, in your opinion?
Well, what is reality, I guess? I mean, I would say that what the higher consciousness says is what's really real is when you leave your body and you go to the other side and you rejoin with every part of yourself once again. That is more real than you in this physical reality. In the physical reality, you come here to kind of learn through storytelling. That's how human beings learn. They learn through storytelling, learning about God, and they embody themselves into these bodies just for the sole purpose of learning and experience. And then when you leave your body, then you become one again. You realize you're God. You're God for eternity. But everybody, the people that play this game on the earth, they come into these physical bodies to learn, to experience a separateness. You know, some people oftentimes wonder, how come not everyone is into this stuff? How come not everyone wants to, learn about themselves and experience what there is to offer, as far as, learning about your mind and extraterrestrials and stuff like that? And the higher consciousness has said that everyone knows deep down that they are God, deep in their subconscious. You're God for eternity. So many people want to experience that separation. They don't want to learn. They don't want to wake up, so to speak, because they want to be separate for a little longer. Because when you return back to source, when you leave your body, you remember once again. And so that's one of the reasons they said why people want that experience of not knowing anything, just so they can have that experience of separateness. Because what we do on this earth plane is really, interesting, because we're really, really learning as we embody these bodies.
Sarah, does God come up much with these people who have been hypnotized?
Well, it comes up sometimes through what beings that consider themselves extraterrestrials when they come through, because they say that as a collective on certain realms that are more advanced, what they did as a collective was that they came over the millennia to understand the truth of the universe, which is that we are God, we are source, and that you come into different realities to remember this. You don't remember. It takes a long time, or you learn this or that. But as a collective, when you remember this as a whole collective, then you ascend ultimately. Then you go up higher and higher in dimension. But that's the goal. It's just like a journey of remembering. You forget to come in to play, but the remembering is what you come to do.
To the phones we go. Colleen is with us in Austin, Texas on the wild card line. Hi, Colleen.
Hi, George. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure thing.
I had a couple of questions, and take my answer off the air, or a theory made. So the propulsion that they were using for the flying machines, could it have been dark matter that they were using as the energy source? That was the first question I had in mind.
What do you mean by dark matter?
Well, they say it's full of dark matter all around us, and
that you can't see in the universe, Sarah.
Yeah, you can't see it, and we don't really know what it.
Yes.
What.
That's what they use a lot of times, and they have said that this energy that they use is all around us, but we humans, or not all humans, have figured out how to use it yet. We don't know. There's been many people who have tried and failed, but we don't know how to use it yet.
When you're hypnotizing a subject, are you looking for answers to these questions that we've been talking about all night, or do they just spout it out?
It depends, because sometimes when I'm working on a project, say like getting information, I'll ask multiple clients the same question to see if the answer is the same. So like that question, I could ask like 5 different people to see if I get a consistent answer.
Interesting. Call, you had another question? Go ahead.
Yeah, the second one, I was thinking, well, I had a theory. I thought, well, is it possible that these grays or these extraterrestrials we're seeing, could that be our ancestors of ours that evolved and their technology got a lot better and they left for something, and somehow we had a reset? So,
all right, Sarah, I think you said that they could be us, right?
Oh my gosh. Yes, definitely. There have been timelines where we've destroyed ourselves. And so what's happening right now is that we're on a very, very good timeline according to all these consciousness that come through. But a lot of effort has been made to get us on this timeline. But yes, a lot of the times these beings that contact these clients are actually relatives, ancestors. Definitely.
Any of your hypnotized subjects talk about ETs as being nefarious, evil, out to get us?
Well, yes, there's always good and bad in the universe because that's the law of this realm of duality. But nothing is entirely bad and nothing is entirely good. It all feeds into one another. So it's important to have the good and the bad in this 3D reality.
Of your 3 books, where do people get them, Sarah?
You can get them on Amazon. Some of them are on Audible as well.
Sarah's website is, of course, linked up at coasttocoastam.com, theholistichuhypnotist.com. How many people do you hypnotize, do you say, in a year?
Oh, my gosh, I have no idea. I don't know. I do this almost every single day.
How many do you hypnotize a day?
Oh, just one, because it's a 5-hour session.
1 a day, and you do like 5 a week?
I do about like 4 a week.
4 a week, so that's
sometimes 5.
So that's 16 a month times 12. That's 180 plus people. That's a lot.
Well, I've been doing this since 2009, so I guess over the years it's a lot of people.
Have you ever hypnotized somebody and what they said scared the living daylights out of you?
No, not at all. Maybe in the beginning when I wasn't really aware of what was happening, but I've really learned that there is nothing to worry about because the universe in itself is working towards unity consciousness. So there really isn't anything at all to worry about. We're so helped. I mean, we just aren't consciously aware of how helped we are as a physical human. We have so much help from extraterrestrials, our ancestors, our loved ones that have passed, so much help to get us where we're going.
Those of you on hold, we're going to get you right after the break and take care of as many calls as we can. Would you hypnotize anybody, or do you turn some people down?
Oh, no, I take anybody. Well, I don't take anybody that has schizophrenia only because there's a fine line between what they believe is real and what isn't real.
Okay, we're going to come back and take final calls with you, Sarah, in a moment. And welcome back to our final segment. George Norrie with you, Sarah Breskman Cosme with us. And let's go to the phones. Jim is in Mexico. Welcome to the show. Hey, Jim.
Good evening, George and Sarah. Happy New Year to both of you.
You too, sir. Thank you for calling.
You're welcome. The reason I'm calling is back when I was in college, I was hypnotized, and I became very interested in it, so I read a bunch of books on it. and became a very good hypnotist myself. And being young and interested in the subject, I decided to do some experiments on some very good subjects who were very easy to hypnotize. And one subject, I got her into a deep state where you're communicating directly with the subconscious mind. And I wanted to see if she could manifest anything physical, external from her body by some suggestion I gave her. So the suggestion I gave her was for her soul to leave her body. And we were in a dorm room, second floor of a 5-floor dormitory, and move this fishing net that was in the ceiling of this dorm room. So when I gave her the suggestion, as soon as I told her soul, I gave her the suggestion that her soul would leave her body, she immediately, the expression on her face completely changed to complete blankness, as though she was dead. And which freaked everybody. There were several other people in the room observing this with me, and it completely freaked me out. And I asked her to move this net in the room, and nothing happened. And so I'm going to cut to the chase here. I asked her soul to return to her body, and nothing happened. And I commanded it, and nothing happened. Finally, I could see this expression change on her face, and I just to see that indeed her soul was back in her body. And I had her remember everything that happened so she could describe it to us. And what she described, first of all, she said that as soon as her soul left her body, she was way up above the building, looking down through the building at us, sort of like a near-death experience that people describe.
Yeah.
And she said she literally went into the light, just like in a near-death experience, and that it was her choice to return. And I remember thinking when her soul was out of her body, I remember thinking, what am I going to tell her parents? Gosh,
that's right. You couldn't get her back together again, huh?
Yeah. What would happen? What would I tell her parents? But anyway, this had a tremendously profound impact on her emotionally, this experience, because she literally said it was like she was, went through the tunnel to the light, and she had the choice to return or not to return, and she ultimately elected to return, thankfully. And so I'm wondering, Sarah, have you had any similar experiences or ever were bold enough to ask somebody's soul to leave their body and have this happen?
Very novel, Sarah.
I know people do this a lot in the form of astral projection, but there is almost like a tether. The soul has like a tether to the body, and nothing can take over the body because it is your body if you do astral projection or leave your body. But I can imagine that must have been an amazing experience for her, because that's the same type of experience that people get when they remember dying and they go into the light. They can have that experience without leaving their body, but it's an overwhelming, I don't know if she described it, how much love that you feel when you're reconnected with Source, with every part of yourself again. It's overwhelming, and you realize the full extent to how powerful and who you really are. I mean, it's incredible. It is life-changing.
When you hypnotize somebody, Sarah, do you know the questions you're going to ask them in advance, or does that just come from the session?
If I'm working on a book, I go by what comes through, what's coming through the client. I don't want to lead them as far as what they want to divulge, to me, what they want to share with me. But when I'm asking, say, like a specific question, then I will ask them, and I will know basically what I'm going to ask. But a lot of these questions kind of come to me. I know I'm being helped a lot by Dolores. It's funny, when she first came through, I was so excited, and she was mad at me. I did something wrong. She's very strict when it comes to her work, and she's very protective. of her work. And she also told me I'm not special. She helps anybody, any of her practitioners, and everybody that asks.
Let's go to Mike in St. Louis. Take it away, Michael. Go ahead.
George, thank you so much for pardon me, for taking my call.
Sure thing.
It's so wonderful. I have two questions. One, I was born with nystagmus. I'd love to have a session with you. I have consistent migraines. And the second question, do you know the doctor and master Zai-Gang Shah that wrote the book Soul Healing Miracles? And do you practice any of that?
I don't know the author. I'm not sure what he wrote, but migraines oftentimes are either, it really depends according to your specific case, but sometimes it can be a head injury from a past life, or it can actually be putting too much pressure on yourself. It depends on where is your migraine or where do you have the pain in your head?
It's essentially my whole brain, my whole head. And I was born with nystagmus, if you're familiar with that, where my eyes moved back and forth. And my head, when I was little, kids would be mean. They'd shake their head and say, "Hey, Mike, how you doing?" Because my head would compensate with my eyes. That's part of the nystagmus that I was born with.
Oh,
and I went through vocational rehabilitation up until my early 20s, and the doctor that I'd spoken with had told me as I go through my 20s, 30s, and 40s, a lot of the migraines would dissipate, and they did. They went away, essentially. He said when you get into your mid-50s, they're going to come back. Pardon me. I have a little thought in my throat there. But, yes, now I'm having extremely bad, much like I did when I was very young. And it's aura headaches. In fact, way beyond that. I'm on 3 different medications, and ironically, one of the over-counter medications work better than the 2 very expensive.
That happens a lot. Go ahead, sir.
It can be very easy for you to heal this. If you go to a quantum healing hypnosis technique practitioner, it's called QHHT, and look it up, you can find someone in your area and have them, regress you and find out the very root cause of the issue and where it originated so that you can find out more about it. And if there's something you need to understand about it or learn from it, and then, release and heal it.
Can people contact you through your website, Sarah?
Yes, that's how people contact me. I'm currently very booked up, but I do have a cancellation list.
Do you also refer them to other hypnotists?
I do. There's people all over the world that practice this as well.
Let's go to Maria in Illinois. Hey, Maria, go ahead. Maria? Sounds like she's asleep. You there, Maria?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, I had a question. So I had heard she had mentioned something earlier about how the body tends to, kind of, like when she was reflecting the right side of the body or the left side of the body, how it kind of, what she said, tells on you. I was wondering what her thoughts about that are, because I used to have really good eyesight, especially in the left and in the right eye, but now I'm like blind in the left eye. Well, I mean, there's still vision there, but when I had
legally
cataracts, well, not cataracts, but when I had a retinal reattachment, it was too little too late in my right eye. So now, like, my left eye is the only...
All right, but what is your question, Maria?
So what does that mean if, like, the eye that you lost sight in is right versus left?
So usually any issue with the right eye means either something you don't want to see that's happening right now. Maybe there's something that is really upsetting that you're witnessing around you, something you don't want to see. And that's right now. That's happening right now. And the left side would be something that happened in the past that you didn't want to see, that you don't want to look back on. it's very, very literal. The right meaning right now and the left in the past. So maybe there's something around you or something you don't really want to look at, so to speak.
Let's go to David in Louisville, Kentucky. Hey, David, go ahead, sir.
Good morning, George. Thank you, sir. Good morning, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good morning.
So I had a stroke September 25th of 2020, and it left me completely paralyzed on the left side of my body. I can't use my arm. I can't use my leg. And I do a lot of therapies trying to relearn to walk. I didn't know if hypnosis might be able to help me regain the use of one of my limbs.
Oh, my gosh, yes. You know, we're not really told this, but the body is a miraculous machine. You can heal yourself with your body. So I definitely would suggest finding a practitioner near you and doing one of these sessions.
How many sessions do you think you would need, Sarah?
Just one. That's why they're 5 hours, because they're so efficient.
And how do you start that? I mean, he had a stroke. How do you de-stroke him, basically?
Well, it wouldn't be the practitioner healing him. It would be his own body, his own recognition of the reason why he had this issue, and find out what the purpose of having the issue was. Because nothing happens to anyone by accident. There's always a reason, a purpose, a cause, a message. And once you find these things out and find out if you need the symptoms anymore, it can be released. Unless it's something that you choose to come and experience for whatever reason to learn and to grow from, then you wouldn't be able to reverse something like that. That would be something that you choose, say, like when people come in with a disability, that's something that they chose to come in with and keep, so that they can learn multiple lessons. Because ultimately, this life is sort of like a video game. It's not totally real, but it feels real. But we come in for these experiences.
But you've seen people with ailments, and they're fine after hypnosis?
Yes. In fact, my first client had a brain condition called pseudotumor cerebri, and that healed completely after her first session. She was working really closely with a team of specialists.
Cynthia is with us in Massachusetts. Welcome to the show. Hi, Cynthia.
Hello. Hi.
Go ahead, hon.
Basically, I just want to get some feeling about my life itself, because my life has been very challenging.
Would hypnosis get that taken care of, Sarah?
Oh, my gosh. Yes. I mean, it would depend on what it was that you wanted to understand or know or learn, or just, you know, a lot of people come in with different challenges, or they experience different challenges to help be the catalyst for something better. It's almost like when you lose your job, you get fired so that you can get a new job that's better. Everybody has certain desires that they want. And the way the universe works is kind of like checks and balances. So it feels like maybe you lose something in order to gain something else. So if you can be like, look around and like an observer, what is this trying to show you? What are you supposed to be doing with this feeling that there's a lot of challenges in your life?
Does the person have to go into the session knowing what they want to accomplish?
No, not at all. In fact, sometimes a lot of the time, people are so surprised by the information that comes through. People come with a list of questions, but a lot of times they're told so many things that they didn't even know they were interested in.
And Sarah, we are rapidly running out of time. I want to thank you again for being on the program. Keep in touch with us, okay?
I will, and I'm going to see you really soon, George, at the Conscious Life Expo, where I'm speaking all about the secrets of the Sphinx.
Great. I'll look forward to that. That's going to be fun. That's going to be in February.
Mm-hmm.
Super. Thanks again. Full information on the Conscious Life Expo, folks, if you're interested, is on our website under the events section that Lex has posted. I'll be there. Come say hi. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladouceur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Burrows, Tim Banal, George Knapp, and Ian Punnett, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.